Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So this series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, May 2nd, 2003, actually happened on May 1st, President George W. Bush, sitting in the co-pilot seat of a Navy fighter jet, landed on the USS Abraham Lincoln, an aircraft carrier that was parked just off the coast of San Diego. Bush emerged from the fighter jet, took off his helmet, and walked to a podium to give a speech. Behind him, behind that podium, was hanging a huge banner that read, "Mission Accomplished." Funnily enough, he never actually used those words in the speech itself. We can maybe get into that. This speech, of course, was taking place some 2 months after the start of the Iraq War. 2 months, depending on how you count, the war in Iraq would continue for some 15 years or more past the mission accomplished speech. But let's talk about that moment itself. Here, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello.
Hey, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode is Slate's Noreen Malone. She's a fantastic writer, and among the many things she does, she is also the host of the most recent season of Slow Burn. Is this the 5th season, Noreen? Is that right?
It is season 5, yes.
There you go. Season 5 of Slow Burn, which is all about the run-up to the war in Iraq. The first 2 episodes are out now as you are listening to this, and they come out on Wednesdays from here on out. But Noreen, thank you for doing this, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And we are Slow Burn host completists on this show. I think we've had all 5 now. It was very important to us. Actually, you were telling us right before we started taping that Mission Accomplished is maybe kind of where you end the season of Slow Burn. Is that right?
Yeah. So the war in Iraq, or the occupation of Iraq, is a huge topic that is maybe worth 10 podcasts on its own. So what we are really looking at in the series is the run-up, how we ended up there. So the starting point, the way we were thinking about it as the 18 months essentially between the 9/11 terror attacks and Mission Accomplished and Shock and Awe. And we ended up, we ended up doing you can't understand Iraq, what happened in 2003 without understanding the 1990s and before. And also you need to know a little bit about what happened afterwards. But roughly, we've been sort of joking around that just like Bush, we declared Mission Accomplished in May and just ending the podcast there.
Well, there you go. So on that point, there's this big banner on this aircraft carrier that says Mission Accomplished. And these are the kind of incisive questions that I ask. There's 2 words in there. One is mission, one is accomplished. Can you define those 2 words as the Bush administration saw them? What was the mission and what did it mean to be accomplished?
Well, I think what a Bush person would tell you is that technically the banner was referring to the USS Lincoln, which was the Navy ship that they were on, had been deployed for 10 months and they were coming back to San Diego. So technically it was about the ship, not the war. But of course, everyone, it became about what Bush was saying about the war because he gave a sort of, all but declaring victory speech. He did not say the war was over because, for technical reasons, under the Geneva Convention, to say this war was over, there would need to be the return of prisoners. But what he did say was that the military phase of the battle to end Saddam Hussein's government was, I think the exact phrase is, one victory in a war on terror that began September 11th, 2001. So he was declaring victory in some sense.
It's so interesting that you mentioned the 1990s because it does feel like this moment grows out of the expectations for what this war would look like based on what happened in the first Persian Gulf War. I mean, is that your sense that the idea that this was going to be capped in a very short amount of time was conditioned by what his father had experienced?
Yeah, I think that's a really smart comparison to make. There had, in the 1990s war, there had been airstrikes beforehand, but I think it was basically a 3-day ground war. And so I think by the time Mission Accomplished happened, you were already at day 43. But the expectation all along from the Bush administration was that this would be a very sort of discreet, contained military operation, because that is what had happened before. And also because Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, was obsessed with efficiency. And he was obsessed with the fact that this was going to be the most modern, efficient war ever. But they had gotten rid of Saddam's military power very quickly. Like, by some technical measure, it had been a success. Now, of course, Saddam Hussein was on the lam. There were already forces gathering that would create the political unrest that followed. And there was no plan for peacekeeping, or there was a plan, but there was not really a thought through plan. But it had been, yes, a short engagement.
I think it's interesting that Donald Rumsfeld gets Bush's speech and takes out these words like, oh my gosh, you can't say this. And then thinks everything is great until, you get to that final moment where it's like mission accomplished is not in the speech, is not in Bush's speech, but the sign behind him was not taken down. No one, I guess, got that memo in terms of like, no, this also is not a good idea.
Well, I think part of that is that the Bush administration saw this as a photo op. Arguably, if they saw it as the launch of the 2004 presidential campaign, I mean, this was sort of the most high level stagecraft. They had, so this was in San Diego, but it sort of looked as if it was photographed so you could just see the open sea. It looked as if it was, a naval carrier at sea. Bush.
They asked the carrier to turn, right, so that the cameras would be pointed out to sea, not to show San Diego in the background, right?
No, exactly. They wanted that background. They timed it. So first of all, they timed it for golden hour in San Diego, so that there would sort of be the most Hollywood light possible. But they also timed it for prime time TV hour on the East Coast on Thursday night, which, if you remember, during this time, Thursday night was sort of must-see TV. So this was a visual opportunity for them. This wasn't just, about making the speech. This was about the photograph. This was about the film clip of him, flying in. That was just as important to them, if not more important, than what the president actually said.
Yeah, we should linger on that image for a moment, because that is in addition to the banner, the lasting image is the president in a flight suit, looking, as the Wall Street Journal put it, virile, sexy, and powerful. Wall Street Journal was super into this war.
Well, but also, it wasn't just the Wall Street Journal. We interviewed Ann Curry for this, and she remembered, she really vividly remembered his flight suit. Tina Fey on Saturday Night Live made a joke about whether Bush had stuffed socks down the front of his jumpsuit. Everyone was comparing him to Tom Cruise. I mean, there was this, Maureen Dowd wrote a column that was very strange and ultimately critical of, the Bush administration for not having found WMDs yet, but she sort of sexualizes George Bush in this very odd way, and does a whole dialogue pretending that he's, I forget if it's Iceman or Maverick from Top Gun, but there was just this really strange reaction where everyone seems to want to just linger on Bush as an action star, as a sex symbol, and not just the Wall Street Journal.
Which is absurd. I don't know. You can, in that moment, we saw it as one way, but looking back on it, you're just like, oh my gosh. It seems ridiculous that, that all of these things would come together in the way that they did, not just the sign, but the whole marketing of it is so problematic, and also very intentional too. The military is not making these, decisions flippantly. The fact that people are thinking about how to stage this particular event is also something noteworthy.
Yeah. I'm looking at the TV listings for this night, May 1st, 2003, Thursday night. You're right. And there's a little gap between Friends and Will and Grace, where they must have cut in and done this speech. The Friends episode was the one with Rachel's other sister. I'm not a Friends watcher, but maybe some people will know which episode that is. But to this point about it being such careful stagecraft, how do you then reconcile that with this idea that, like, oh, we didn't expect when we put a banner that said mission accomplished behind it that people would think we were saying mission accomplished? Like, is there a tension there? Or is that really just like once it went sour, that's the argument looking backwards at it?
I mean, I think that's a very, that's the argument that you have to make afterwards. This was an administration that really cared about stagecraft, not just here, but sort of in the rollout to the war, and they cared about Hollywood style stagecraft. There was a briefing room set up in Doha for the military to give updates about the war, and the Bush administration engaged the set maker from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire to make a set for them so that it would be optimal for TV. I mean, they thought all of this out.
Crazy.
It had not sort of, yeah, that's one of my favorite. We tried to track down that guy and get him to talk to us, but didn't have any luck, unfortunately.
Probably under an NDA or something.
Yeah.
And what do we make of this story? Kellie referred to it, but that Donald Rumsfeld told Bob Woodward maybe many years later that he tried to take out the sort of more mission accomplished language from this. Is that Rumsfeld trying to correct the record after the fact, or do you think that that's legit given the dynamics that you've explored?
I could see that. I don't have any sort of special knowledge beyond what Bob Woodward has reported. I could see that being true. I mean, it is striking that it is not in the speech. I am interested in what is in the speech, because I do think the speech sort of captures the dynamics of what Bush was pushing in the entire time in the lead up to the war. He is using this language of with this or against us, war on terror. One thing that you see that's interesting in the speech, at this point, Saddam Hussein had not been captured and there had been no weapons of mass destruction found. That was already starting to become an issue. That was the entire stated cause for war. Actually, our episode that's coming out this week is on how the cause for war became WMD. And so what you see Bush do in this speech is he is connecting this supposed victory in Iraq back to Al-Qaeda. And he's saying we took out an ally of the terrorists. And that had not, the connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda had been actually rejected by the CIA 6 months earlier or something like that. And now he was returning to it because he couldn't say the WMD thing. So they were already a little bit in scrambling mode.
Right, it tells you so much that when you're in scrambling mode, you kind of double down in this sort of very declarative way, right?
Well, it's such an interesting moment. And I'm just still kind of going back to what you were saying about how it wasn't just the Wall Street Journal, that it's important to remember that in this moment, so many, certainly not all, but so many Americans were still kind of caught up in war fever. Certainly it had changed some since the immediate aftermath of September 11th in 2001. But there was this spirit that we're all in it. But you can begin to see, as you were just saying about the speech, you can begin to see where the cracks would be in terms of the justification for the war and not finding the weapons of mass destruction and the lack of follow through, like all of the seeds for what would become a pretty sharp turn in public opinion are here in this moment of celebration.
Yeah, I think that's actually one thing people forget is that this was a hugely popular war. By one measure, about 3/4 of Americans supported it just before it happened in March 2003. And that number sort of dipped. It was just over half of Americans in the fall supported it. That had dipped from the year before. In 2001, a lot of Americans supported war in Iraq, even though there was no clear connection to Al-Qaeda. But it wasn't just Republicans, right? I think a lot of people saw pretty quickly, starting that summer and later, that this had been a bad idea, and certainly felt misled by the lack of WMD. But the mood in the country was with Bush. He was a popular president at this point. The sort of consensus of this mission accomplished moment was that it was a really strong start to his presidential campaign. Of course, it ended up by the time 2004 came around, it was pretty clear which way things were headed in Iraq. But at this moment, that wasn't the case.
I would argue that has been forgotten a little bit, and weirdly also the opposition to the war has been forgotten as well. That like the biggest protests in history up to that point, were in the run up to the war, before even the WMD's argument was being presented. And I think there was a lot of Americans who saw this mission accomplished moment in real time and saw it as a complete fiasco. And so as you think about your series, Noreen, one of the things that Slow Burn does so well is just goes back and uncovers all the things that people have forgotten. Yeah. What are the things that you're noticing that feel like, oh, we've managed to memory hole this, or we've managed to write a new story about this?
Well, on the protests, it is interesting. They were certainly undercovered in the press. And a part of that is because a lot of the people who were running big institutions, cable news, big newspapers, sort of influential small magazines, were supporters of the war. So this sort of populist big demonstrations, these were getting undercovered. And we did an interview with Eli Pariser, who was the founder of MoveOn.org, which was sort of influential in that moment. But so that is one thing that has been forgotten, that there was, it's interesting. So both the protests themselves have been forgotten, but also the degree to which so many Democrats were in favor. I think there has been some revisionist history. A lot of people like to say that the left was super clear-eyed, and there are plenty of people on the left who were. But sort of the Democratic Party really was backing Bush, and some of that was political pressure from the mood in the country. Some of that was people believing in the WMD thing. So I think people have forgotten how unified the establishment was in supporting this war. One thing that we're looking at, we're doing an episode later on in the season on the media, and we are sort of using the Judy Miller scandal at the New York Times as our jumping off point. And of course, a lot of people remember, Judy Miller as sort of committing the worst journalistic sins. But one thing that I think is forgotten that we're going to try to bring out in the other episode is that she was not alone, that she was not the only reporter sort of out in front of things. And there's a whole set of reasons why, she gets more flack than other people do, and her career sort of ended, and other people have gone on to positions of great prominence in journalism, despite getting some things really wrong in the lead up to the Iraq War.
Oh, good. I want the journalistic skeletons in the closet to come tumbling out. Plenty. Yes, I'm very into that.
Yeah.
I just think it's such an important project for the reasons that Jody was just saying, that there is this, because there is such a sense now that the war went so badly and that so much of it was so wrong. The efforts to say that nobody could have known at the time that that we were being lied to, or, for the people who now feel like they were on the wrong side of history, that it was just, there was no way you could have known. It's great to be able to recover the history of that moment, because it's been such a powerful political debate that it can sometimes be hard to recover what actually happened.
Yeah, that was sort of our starting point for this, was why did this happen? There should have been so many signs, and in fact, if you look closely, there were signs that were ignored for all kinds of reasons. And of course, you could make the argument that just the whole undertaking, shouldn't have been even on the table.
All right, well, let's leave it there. Noreen Malone, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for doing this new season of Slow Burn.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
And it's there's 2 episodes out now. It's 8 episodes total. Is that right?
8 episodes total, yeah.
Okay, great. So people should go start listening to that. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Thanks again to everyone who has reached out with comments and questions and potential topics. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com. My name is Jody Avergan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Any outlaw regime that has ties to terrorist groups and seeks or possesses weapons of mass destruction is a grave danger to the civilized world and will be confronted. The transition from dictatorship to democracy will take time, but it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done.
Radiotopia.